They begged me to make it quick. I showed them mercy instead. If you crave HFY stories where humanity's compassion shatters galactic expectations, subscribe for more tales of unexpected redemption. The conflict they called the California Quarantine had shattered the Pacific coastline before Corporal Kaelen Vance ever received his orders. The ground here was a fused patchwork of black glass and scorched earth, the air thick with the static of fallen drones and the ozone tang of energy weapons. He'd been deployed as a solo asset, standard procedure for a Deathworlder specialist, to neutralize an insurgent data hub operating out of an old military silo in the ruined district of Columbia outskirts. But the mission would not be remembered for the hostiles he eliminated. It would be remembered for the two pale-skinned sisters, their arms marked with the intricate tattoos of the Orion diaspora, who huddled in a converted storage locker believing his arrival heralded their execution, and how a single act of compassion rewrote their destinies. The stealth insertion pod had deposited him 5 clicks west at moonset. The horizon was a bleeding scar of crimson where the capital's defenses still burned, the silhouettes of broken monuments and shattered federal buildings standing as tombstones against the glow. Kaelen Vance cycled the action on his pulse rifle, adjusted the servos in his reinforced leg armor, and moved like a ghost through the rubble-choked streets. The insurgents had taken over the ruins of a pre-fall Smithsonian archive. Broken display cases, half-melted historical dioramas, and reinforced data vaults. Through his multispectral visor, he tagged 22 hostile life signs. Most were lightly armed patrols, 2 heavy weapon emplacements at the main entrance. Simple. Deathworlders were a legend, a threat, a contingency in every galactic military playbook. Unyielding, resilient, brutally efficient. Earth itself was a Class 12 Deathworld, a galactic anomaly of extreme gravity, predatory fauna, and volatile ecosystems that bred survivors where other species would perish. Humans were myths of resilience to some, nightmares of destruction to others. Vance simply considered himself a soldier. He breached the perimeter through a collapsed ventilation shaft, disabling motion sensors with targeted EM bursts. The first sentry died without a whisper, a sharp neural disruption from his gauntlet. The next fire team never saw the flechettes that ended them. Moments later, the complex's internal alarms screamed into the pre-dawn stillness. But by then, the halls were already painted in the aftermath of his passage. When the last bolt of plasma seared into a wall, he stood amidst the crackling silence, his dark armor streaked with carbon scoring and dust. Smoke curled from overheating conduits. His mission HUD flashed, "Primary objective neutralized," in stark, green letters. But he didn't signal for extraction because a sound, faint and desperate, reached his audio pickups. The sound of weeping. Vance followed the muffled cries to a reinforced door that had been retrofitted with a heavy magnetic lock. He pried it open with a hydraulic whine from his suit's servos. Inside, 2 women, thin and shivering, their skin the color of moonstone, were chained to a data conduit. The elder had hair the shade of spun silver, tangled and dirty. The younger's dark hair was plastered to her face, her violet eyes blazing with a defiant terror even in the dim light. When they saw his hulking, armored form fill the doorway, they flinched back in unison. His helmet's translator parsed their whispered pleas. "Please!" The silver-haired one breathed, her voice cracking. "Just make it quick, Deathworlder." The younger one spat, her words laced with a venom born of utter despair. "Do it fast, human. We will not give you the satisfaction of our screams." Kaelen froze. That word, Deathworlder. Always a curse, always a prelude to violence. He took a slow, measured breath, magnetically sealed, his rifle to his backplate, and took a step forward, his hands open and empty. "I'm not here to harm you," he said, the modulator in his helmet softening the edges of his voice. "I'm here to shut this place down." Their eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted between his faceless visor and his open hands. He knelt. The chains clinked as he reached for the electronic lock on their restraints. The silver-haired one, who he would later know as Elara, flinched so violently she nearly toppled over. The younger one, Lyra, bared her teeth in a silent snarl, her body coiled like a spring. With a precise application of current from his suit's tool array, the lock on Elara's manacles sparked and died. He undid Lyra's next, then the shackles binding their ankles. The final restraint clattered to the cold floor. Vance stood, stepping back to give them a clear view of the open doorway, the rubble-strewn hall, the path to the outside. "You're free," he stated, his tone flat and factual. Neither of them moved. The silence stretched, thick with disbelief and a lifetime of broken promises. Finally, Elara whispered, "Free." The word itself seemed foreign on her tongue, fragile and unfamiliar. He gave a single, sharp nod. "No one left to stop you. You can go." They didn't go. Instead, as he turned to leave and complete his data retrieval, he heard the soft, hesitant shuffle of bare feet on the grimy floor behind him. The sisters were following, their expressions a tangled web of wariness and a desperate, nascent hope, as if waiting for the other boot to drop. He didn't acknowledge them. He didn't tell them to leave either. Vance opened a channel to command as they trailed him through the corpse-littered hallways. Vance reporting. Data hub neutralized. 2 non-combatants liberated. No hostile survivors. Proceeding with intel retrieval. The voice that crackled back was filtered and calm. Acknowledged, Corporal. Extraction in 3 hours. Hold position at the primary site. Copy. Holding position. He closed the channel and glanced back. The 2 pale-skinned women stood in the ruins, illuminated by the flickering emergency lighting. Their clothes were little more than rags, their wrists raw and bleeding from the manacles. They looked at him as if he were a force of nature given form, something terrifying, unpredictable, and impossibly merciful. Kaelen sighed internally and dropped his heavy pack, retrieving 2 sealed nutrient bars. "Are you hungry?" Elara blinked slowly. Lyra scowled, her suspicion a palpable force. "I don't poison my allies," he added dryly, tossing 1 bar to each of them. "You'll need your strength if you plan on running." Elara hesitated, then picked up the bar with trembling fingers. Lyra, after a moment of glaring, reluctantly followed her sister's lead. They ate in silence under the broken ceiling of the archive. Somewhere beyond the shattered walls, the war for Earth continued to rage. But here, in the heart of the ruin, something new and fragile had begun to stir, something the wider galaxy would never have believed possible. A Deathworlder who offered a hand instead of a blade, and 2 former slaves who had forgotten what it meant to be free. The following hours were unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that felt louder than any battlefield. The scent of ozone and ionized metal hung heavy in the stagnant air. Kaelen Vance positioned himself near a collapsed exhibit on early spaceflight, his rifle across his knees, his visor scanning the thermal and motion feeds. He had fought in countless engagements, from the jungles of South America to the frozen tundras of Eurasia, but this oppressive quiet, punctuated only by the sisters' hushed whispers, weighed on him more than any enemy barrage. Exhaustion. Elara kept glancing at him, as if he might transform into the monster she still feared he was. Lyra's gaze was a constant, burning ember of mistrust. He couldn't fault them. During his indoctrination into the Terran Star Corps, the instructors had been blunt about how other species perceived humanity. "They will call you Deathworlders," the drill sergeant had barked. "They will see you as predators, as unstoppable forces of nature from a planet that tries to kill everything on it daily." He had dismissed it as propaganda, as useful fiction. But now, seeing the visceral terror that label invoked in these 2 women, it felt like a brand. Vance pulled a compact survival blanket from his kit and tossed it toward them. "The temperature will drop significantly before dawn. You'll need this." Elara startled when the silvery fabric landed at her feet. Lyra let out a low, guttural sound, a primal expression of distrust. "I am not your enemy," he stated, leaning his head back against the broken fuselage of a model rocket. "You can share the warmth or not. Your choice." This, more than anything, seemed to confuse them further. They didn't move closer to the blanket, but they didn't retreat from it either. He noted how they stayed within arm's reach of each other, a sisterly bond that had likely been their only shield against despair. They had no supplies, no allies, and no chance of survival in the wasteland outside. So, they stayed near the one person who could end them in a heartbeat, the Deathworlder who had, thus far, done the opposite. Eventually, the silence became a presence in itself. "Do you have names?" he asked, not turning to look at them. They exchanged a hurried, silent conversation with their eyes. Then Elara answered softly, "I am Elara. This is my sister, Lyra." He nodded once. Kaelen Vance." "Kaelen," she repeated, testing the syllables. Lyra muttered something sharp in her native tongue, and the translator caught a fragment. "Names for ghosts?" He ignored it. Instead, he unsealed a water canister and passed it over. Elara flinched when her fingers brushed against his armored glove, but she drank deeply. When she passed it to Lyra, the younger sister paused, her violet eyes locking with his visor before she finally drank. "Why did you free us?" Lyra finally demanded, her voice low and rough. "Because you were prisoners," Kaelen replied simply. "That's reason enough." She frowned, her expression dissatisfied. "You are Deathworlder. You kill. That is your function." He allowed a faint, humorless smirk. "You're not entirely wrong, but sometimes killing is how we stop the people who do the enslaving." Her scowl deepened, though some of the fire left her voice. "You could have killed us more easily than freeing us." "Yeah," he said, methodically field-stripping his rifle. "But then I'd have to carry that, and some burdens are heavier than any weapon." That quieted her. Even Elara seemed to be reassessing him, her large eyes thoughtful. The dim light from his suit's power cell glinted off their pale skin and his scarred, matte black armor. As the artificial night deepened, Kaelen set up a discreet perimeter, motion-sensitive microdrones and acoustic sensors. The sisters watched his every move with a wary fascination. When he was done, he noticed they had finally unfolded the blanket and were sitting on it, closer to the ambient heat his suit radiated. Not near him, but no longer at the far edge of the light. He sat down again, looking at them. "Are you from this sector?" "From the district." Elara shook her head. "No. We were taken from a transport ship many cycles ago. Our people were streams." Her voice hitched. "We were not meant to leave this place alive." Lyra added quietly, "We built their cages. Then they locked us inside." Kaelen's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Then it's a good thing they're gone." She tilted her head, a strange look in her eyes. "You say that so easily, but you ended them all." "Yes," he said, his gaze fixed on a point in the middle distance. "Because someone had to." The silence that followed was different, not filled with fear, but with a grim, shared understanding. As the hours wore on, Elara's head began to nod. Lyra fought to stay awake, her eyes still darting toward him every few minutes, watching for any sign of threat. But exhaustion was a relentless enemy, and it eventually won. They curled together under the survival blanket, their breathing slowly evening out into the rhythms of sleep. Kaelen remained awake long after they drifted off, his HUD painting the ruins in shades of green and gray. The minor burns and impacts from the earlier firefight were stiffening, but he ignored the discomfort. He wasn't sure what the protocol was for this. He had liberated prisoners before, but they had always fled at the first opportunity, terrified of their liberator. These two were different. Perhaps they didn't trust the freedom he offered. Or perhaps, against all odds, they trusted him more than the desolate world outside. He looked over at them one last time before powering down his visor's external displays. They slept pressed together, their faces finally relaxed. In the low light, their moonstone skin seemed to glow faintly. "You're safe now," he murmured to himself, the sound swallowed by his helmet. But a faint, almost imperceptible vibration traveled up through the floor, a metallic hum echoing from the deep silo levels below. He frowned. A signal ghost flickered at the edge of his motion tracker, then vanished. Could be settling debris, could be something else. Either way, he'd be ready. He adjusted his grip on his rifle, settled into a low-power watch cycle, and kept his senses tuned to the dark. The sisters slept. The ruins were still, And somewhere in the depths below, something was awake. The vibration was a low, persistent hum, a tremor through the floor that spoke of heavy machinery powering up from the deep silo levels. Kaelen Vance was on his feet in an instant, his rifle a familiar weight in his hands, the sleepers forgotten for a crucial second. The sisters, Elara and Lyra, startled awake at his sudden movement, their eyes wide with renewed fear as they clutched the survival blanket. "What is it?" Elara whispered, her voice trembling. Kaelen didn't answer immediately, his helmeted head tilted as he processed the data streaming across his HUD. The acoustic sensors were picking up the hum, but the motion trackers remained stubbornly silent. "Stay down and stay quiet," he ordered, his voice a low, modulated command that brooked no argument. He moved to the blasted entrance of the exhibit hall, peering out into the dark corridor. The emergency lights had failed completely now, plunging the complex into a darkness that was absolute to anyone without his enhanced optics. To him, the world was painted in crisp shades of green and black. The hum grew louder, resolving into the distinct sound of a freight elevator ascending from the sublevels. They hadn't cleared the entire complex. He'd missed a secondary access point, a hidden shaft. The insurgents had a backup team, or perhaps an automated security protocol he'd triggered. "Command, this is Vance. I have a contact. Unscheduled elevator ascent from sublevel 5. Possible hostiles. Adjusting position." The comms crackled back, the operator's voice tense. "Acknowledged, Corporal. Be advised, your extraction is still 2 hours out. You are on your own." "Understood." He killed the channel and glanced back at the sisters. They were crouched together, their pale faces stark in his night vision. Lyra met his gaze, her violet eyes reflecting a hard light he hadn't seen before. "They're coming back, aren't they?" she said, her voice flat, all trace of sleep gone. "Someone is," Kaelen confirmed, his mind already racing through tactical options. The archive was a poor defensive position, too many avenues of approach. But the silo control room he'd passed earlier, it had one entrance, reinforced walls, and a defensible corridor. "We're moving. Now, stay close to me and do exactly as I say." He didn't wait for their agreement. He slung his rifle and in one smooth motion, grabbed his pack and the survival blanket, shoving them at Elara. "Carry these." To his surprise, Lyra snatched the blanket while Elara shouldered the pack, both moving with a swiftness born of reawakened terror. He led them out of the exhibit hall and into the dark corridor, moving at a swift, silent jog. The sisters followed, their bare feet making no sound on the dusty floor, their fear lending them a grace they hadn't possessed before. The hum of the elevator ceased, replaced by the distant, metallic screech of doors opening. They were out of time. Kaelen pushed them ahead of him into the control room, a circular chamber filled with dead consoles and shattered monitor screens. "Get behind that central console and don't move," he commanded, already turning to face the doorway. He didn't bother with the heavy door. It was rusted shut. Instead, he knelt, bracing his rifle against the doorframe, and placed a cluster of micro-explosives on the floor just outside the threshold. The first insurgent rounded the corner 50 meters down the hall, his weapon raised. He never saw the flechette that took him in the throat. The second one fired a wild burst of plasma that seared the wall beside Kaelen's head. The return fire was precise 2 rounds center mass. But more were coming. They moved with a discipline the first group had lacked, using cover, laying down suppressing fire. These weren't just insurgents, they were professionals, heavily accented standard. "You have something that belongs to us. Surrender the data cores and the technicians, and you may yet live." So that was it. The sisters weren't just slaves. They were valuable assets. Their technical knowledge was the key to whatever data the insurgents were hoarding. Kaelen didn't bother replying. He detonated the micro-explosives. The blast wasn't large, but it was concussive and filled the corridor with shrapnel and smoke. Cries of pain echoed. He used the distraction to drop 2 more hostiles. But they were adapting, flanking. A plasma bolt slammed into the doorframe next to him, spraying molten composite material across his shoulder plate. He grunted, feeling the heat bleed through. They're trying to get around the side, Lyra shouted from behind the console, her voice sharp with panic. She was peeking over the top, her eyes wide. I see them, Kaelen growled, switching targets and firing down the cross corridor where two figures were attempting to advance. He hit one. The other ducked back. The firefight became a brutal exchange of controlled bursts and searing energy. Kaelen was a rock, an unmovable point of defense, his aim unerring, his movements economical. But he was one man against a squad that knew the terrain. A grenade clattered into the room. Down! He roared, twisting and firing a single shot at the small orb. His round struck it, detonating it prematurely in the doorway. The blast wave hit him like a physical blow, slamming him back against the central console. Alarms blared inside his helmet. Systems flickered. His left audio pickup went dead. Elara screamed. Through his ringing right ear and the HUD's damage reports, Kaelen saw Lyra scramble forward. Not in fear, but in fury. She grabbed the sidearm from the hip holster of his armor, a weapon he kept for emergencies. Her hands were shaking, but her face was a mask of grim determination. Lyra, no! Elara cried, but Lyra was already up, leaning around the shattered doorframe and pulling the trigger. The recoil was violent, the report deafening in the enclosed space. The shot went wide, sparking off the far wall, but it forced the advancing insurgent to duck. The safety! Kaelen barked, pushing himself up, his world tilting. He reached over, his gauntlet hand covering hers, and flipped the switch on the weapon. Breathe. Squeeze. Lyra met his eyes for a split second, then nodded, her jaw clenched. She leaned out again, breathed out as he'd said, and fired. This time, the shot hit its mark, catching an insurgent in the leg. He went down with a cry. It wasn't a kill, but it was enough. The suppressing fire halted for a critical moment. That was all Kaelen needed. He surged to his feet, ignoring the pain in his side, and laid down a devastating barrage down the main corridor. The remaining hostiles broke, falling back. Silence descended, broken only by the hiss of damaged electronics and Lyra's ragged panting as she slumped against the console, the heavy pistol still clutched in her white-knuckled hands. Kaelen quickly resealed the breach in his shoulder plating with a patch of quick-set sealant from his kit. He then turned to Lyra. She was staring at the weapon, then at him, her expression a turbulent mix of shock, horror, and a fierce, burgeoning pride. You fight like a Deathworlder, he said, his voice gravelly. She looked up, her violet eyes blazing. You fight like someone who wants to live, he corrected himself softly. He took the pistol from her gently, checking the charge. Thank you. Elara emerged from behind the console, her face pale. She looked from her sister to Kaelen and back again, and for the first time, the raw terror in her eyes was joined by something else. A dawning, formidable respect. They will send more, Elara stated, her voice surprisingly steady. They will not stop. The data we hold in our minds is too valuable. Kaelen nodded, cycling a fresh power cell into his rifle. The familiar click-clack was a promise of violence to come. Then we'll be ready, but we can't stay here. They know this position. He looked at the two sisters, one who had found her courage and one who was still searching for it. We're going to move again, to the surface. It's time to show you the sky. The journey back through the ruins was tense and silent. Kaelen led, his senses stretched to their limits, his rifle a constant extension of his will. The sisters followed, their earlier hesitation gone, replaced by a grim determination. They moved like shadows, their eyes now constantly scanning the darkness, their ears tuned to every drip of water and shift of rubble. When they finally emerged from a collapsed service entrance, the pre-dawn air was cold and sharp, a shocking contrast to the stale, metallic atmosphere of the silo. The sky above the ruined District of Columbia was a deep, bruised purple, streaked with the first hints of fiery orange. Elara and Lyra stopped dead in their tracks, their heads tilting back as one. They had not seen the open sky in cycles. The sheer, terrifying vastness of it seemed to overwhelm them. Lyra, for all her defiance, let out a soft, shuddering breath. Elara simply stared, her silver hair stirring in the faint breeze, her eyes drinking in the constellations she hadn't seen since her capture. "It's so big," Elara whispered, the words barely audible. "It's freedom," Kaelen said, his own helmeted gaze sweeping the jagged skyline for threats. "And it's a battlefield. We need to keep moving. The extraction point is still a click east, past the river." He handed Lyra the sidearm again, this time ensuring the safety was off. "You've earned the right to carry it. Just remember it's a tool. Use it to protect your sister." Lyra took the weapon, her grip more confident this time. She nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. They were no longer just a Deathworlder and his charges. They were a fireteam, bound by survival and the first fragile threads of trust. As they picked their way through the skeletal remains of a bridge, the sun finally crested the horizon, its light painting the broken world in gold and blood. The war was still out there, waiting. But for now, under the open sky, 3 souls moved as one, each carrying a new weight, the weight of a future they had to fight for, together. The faint hum of a distant dropship engine teased the edge of his hearing, a promise of salvation that was still too far away. Kaelen adjusted his grip on his rifle and led them on, into the dawn, and into whatever awaited them next. The rising sun did little to warm the chilling dread that had settled over the ruins. Its light was a liar, painting the devastation in a false, hopeful gold. Kaelen Vance kept them moving at a punishing pace, his armored form a relentless vanguard through the skeletal remains of the district. The Potomac was a sluggish, polluted ribbon ahead, its bridges shattered and submerged. Their path was a treacherous climb over the collapsed girders of what was once the Arlington Memorial Bridge, each step a gamble on unstable metal and crumbling concrete. The sisters followed, their bare feet now wrapped in strips of fabric torn from the survival blanket, their movements becoming surer, more instinctive with each passing minute. Lyra's gaze was no longer just defiant. It was analytical, her eyes constantly scanning the high ground, the shadows, the potential kill zones, mirroring his own tactical assessment. Elara, while still visibly frightened, had a new steadiness to her, a quiet resolve that kept her moving forward without complaint. The sidearm in Lyra's hand was no longer a foreign object of terror but a known quantity, a weight she carried with a grim sense of purpose. They were halfway across the treacherous span when Kaelen's HUD flared with a high-priority alert. A new contact, moving fast and low from the north. Not a dropship, a gunship. The insurgents weren't just sending more ground troops. They were escalating. "Contact! Gunship! Take cover!" he barked, shoving the sisters toward the dubious shelter of a massive, tilted concrete pylon. The world erupted in noise and fire. The gunship, a sleek, predatory shape bristling with cannons, screamed over the river. Its rotary cannons spun up, chewing the bridge to pieces. Chunks of concrete and shrapnel exploded around them. Kaelen returned fire, his pulse rifle sending bright lances of energy skyward, but the craft's shields flared, absorbing the impacts. It was like throwing pebbles at a titan. "We can't fight that," Elara cried, huddling with her sister behind the pylon as another strafing run sent molten metal raining down. "We don't have to kill it. We just have to survive it," Kaelen shouted back, his mind racing. The extraction point was so close, just on the other side of the river, but it might as well have been on another planet. The gunship banked for another pass, its weapons tracking their position. It was lining up for the kill shot. In that moment, Kaelen made a decision. It was a desperate, insane gamble, a move born of a Deathworlder's refusal to accept a no-win scenario. "Lyra, the pistol. Aim for its sensor array, the dome under its nose. Don't think, just fire everything you have when I say. Elara, when it breaks off, you run for the far shore. Don't look back." He didn't wait for their confirmation. As the gunship dove, he did the unthinkable. He stood up from cover, making himself the biggest, brightest target on the bridge. He raised his rifle and poured a continuous, sustained burst of fire directly into its cockpit canopy. It was a suicidal act. The gunship's pilot, predictably, took the bait, shifting all fire onto him. Plasma bolts hammered his personal shields, overloading them in a shower of sparks. His armor screamed with damage alerts. But for 2 precious seconds, the gunship was focused solely on him. Now, Lyra! Now! From the cover of the pylon, Lyra leaned out, her face a mask of concentration and terror. She didn't aim. She just pointed the heavy pistol at the looming craft and squeezed the trigger over and over again. The shots were wild, most sparking harmlessly off the armored hull. But one, a single, impossibly lucky shot, struck the vulnerable sensor housing. A shower of sparks and optical glass erupted from the gunship's nose. It wobbled violently, its targeting systems blinded. The pilot, disoriented, pulled up hard, aborting the killing run and veering away over the city. The roar of its engines faded, leaving a ringing, systems flashing red. He turned. Lyra was staring at the smoking pistol in her hand, her chest heaving, her expression one of pure, unadulterated shock. Elara was already moving, grabbing her sister's arm and pulling her toward the far shore. "You're hit?" Elara said, her voice tight with fear, as they reached the relative safety of the riverbank and ducked into the shell of a collapsed museum. Kaelen leaned against a wall, the servos in his leg whining in protest. "I'll live. That was good shooting." Lyra finally looked up from the pistol, her violet eyes wide. I didn't aim. I just fired." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Kaelen grunted, applying a fresh medgel patch to a seared section of his chest plate. "You broke its focus. That's what matters." He looked at them both, covered in dust and sweat, their makeshift footwear already in tatters, but alive. Truly alive, not just surviving. "They won't give up. That gunship will be back, and it'll have friends. We need to get to the extraction point, and we need to do it now." The final kilometer was a sprint through a graveyard of monuments. They passed the scorched husk of the Washington Monument, a broken needle against the sky. The air grew thicker with the static of jamming signals. His comms were breaking up, the extraction beacon flickering in and out on his HUD. The LZ was a clearing near the ruins of the Lincoln Memorial, a place that had once symbolized unity, now just another patch of scarred earth. As they burst into the clearing, the familiar roar of a Terran dropship's engines filled the air. It was descending, its ramp already lowering. Salvation was 50 meters away, and then the world turned to fire. From the tree line, a previously hidden insurgent squad opened up with everything they had. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the dropship's flank, sending it listing sideways. Pulse fire peppered the ground around them. They had been waiting. This was an ambush. The sisters froze, caught in the open. Kaelen didn't hesitate. He moved in front of them, his body a shield, his rifle speaking a language of pure, unadulterated violence. He dropped 3 hostiles in as many seconds, but there were too many. A bolt caught him in the thigh, punching through the armor. He grunted, stumbling, but didn't fall. "Run! To the ship!" he roared. Elara and Lyra ran, dodging and weaving as Kaelen provided covering fire, a one-man army holding back the tide. Lyra fired the pistol blindly behind her as she ran, not to hit anything, but to make them keep their heads down. They reached the ramp. A crew chief in gray armor was there, hauling them inside. "Vance, let's go," the chief yelled. Kaelen turned to make his own sprint, but a searing pain erupted in his back as a plasma bolt found a weak point in his armor. He fell to one knee, his vision swimming. This was it. He had gotten them out. That was the mission now. But as he prepared to turn and sell his life as dearly as possible to cover their escape, he saw a blur of motion. Lyra had torn a pulse rifle from the stunned crew chief's hands. Elara was right beside her, grabbing a medkit. They didn't get on the ship. They came back for him. Lyra laid down a blistering, reckless wave of fire toward the tree line, her scream of fury echoing his own. Elara, her hands steady despite the chaos, slapped a trauma patch onto the wound in his back. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in the universe. The 2 former slaves, the ones who had begged for a quick death, were now fighting to save the life of their Deathworlder. The crew chief, recovering from his shock, added his own fire to Lyra's. The insurgent advance faltered under the unexpected, savage counterattack. Kaelen, fueled by a surge of something he couldn't name, pride, gratitude, a fierce, protective fury, forced himself to his feet. He grabbed Lyra's shoulder, pulling her back, while the crew chief did the same with Elara. "We're leaving. Now!" Up the ramp as it began to close. The last thing Kaelen saw before the hatch sealed was the frustrated faces of their ambushers, denied their prize. Inside the vibrating cabin, he collapsed against a bulkhead, his breathing ragged. The sisters slumped opposite him, their chests heaving, their faces smeared with soot and streaked with tears that weren't from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming intensity of what they had just done. The crew chief stared at them, then at Kaelen. "What in the seven hells are they, Corporal?" Kaelen looked at Elara and Lyra, at their determined, soot-stained faces, and he gave a tired, blood-streaked smile. "They're with me." The dropship climbed, leaving the burning District of Columbia behind. They had made it. They were free. But as Kaelen looked at the two sisters who had chosen to run back into hell for him, he knew the real mission was only just beginning. The hum of the engines was a lullaby of survival, and for the first time in a long time, Kaelen Vance allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth fighting for beyond the next mission, beyond the next kill. It was a dangerous thought, and it was the most human one he'd had in years. The sterile, recycled air of the orbital station was a shock to the system after the acrid smoke and ozone of the battlefield. The dropship settled into its docking clamps with a final, shuddering groan, its hull pitted and scarred from the ambush. The moment the bay doors sealed, the controlled chaos of a military debarkation unfolded around them. Medics with floating gurneys, engineers assessing the damage, and the low, urgent chatter of deck officers over the comms. Kaelen Vance remained slumped against the bulkhead, the adrenaline drain leaving him feeling hollowed out and heavy. The wound in his back was a dull, insistent throb, the med-gel doing little more than sealing the breach. He watched through a haze of pain as Elara and Lyra were gently but firmly guided from the ship by two medics, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror at the vast, brightly lit hangar of the USS Constellation. They looked back at him, their expressions pleading, and he managed a faint, reassuring nod before the hangar doors hissed shut behind them. A shadow fell over him. Commander Jax Thorne, his superior, stood with his arms crossed, his crisp uniform a stark contrast to Kaelen's battered, bloodied armor. Thorne's gaze was a physical weight, flicking from the damaged ship to Kaelen and then toward the closed doors. "Vance, report." Kaelen pushed himself upright, ignoring the fire in his leg and back. "Mission accomplished, sir. Data hub destroyed. 2 non-combatants retrieved. They assisted in our extraction under heavy fire." Thorne's eyebrow twitched. "Assisted? My report says one of them discharged a firearm on my ship." "She saved our lives, Commander." "They both did. They're not hostiles. They're survivors. They are combined assets, Corporal. A significant security risk. I should have them in isolation." Kaelen met his commander's stare, his own gaze flat and unwavering behind his cracked visor. "Then you'll have to explain to command why you detained 2 unarmed refugees who just helped a Deathworlder operative cheat a company-level ambush." The air between them grew taut. Thorne's jaw worked silently. He was a good officer, pragmatic to a fault, but he understood political fallout. Finally, he let out a short, sharp breath. "You are a perpetual headache, Vance." A ghost of a smile touched Kaelen's lips. "That's why you keep sending me to hell, sir." Thorne gestured to the waiting medics. "Get him to medbay. Full debrief in 4 hours." He then turned to a nearby sergeant. "The 2 guests. Quarantine Suite B. Full medical and psych eval. No restraints." The word restraints made both Kaelen and, he was sure, the sisters flinch, even through walls. As the medics helped him onto a gurney, Kaelen caught Thorne's eye one last time. "They stay with me, Commander. That's the deal." Thorne just shook his head, a gesture of exhausted resignation. "Just get patched up, Corporal." The next few hours were a blur of antiseptic smells, the whir of bone knitters, and the prick of nanite injections. He drifted in and out of a drugged sleep, his dreams haunted by the sounds of plasma fire and the sight of Lyra standing her ground, firing a pistol at a gunship. When he was finally cleared for light duty, his body a patchwork of fresh synth skin and lingering aches, his first stop wasn't the debriefing room. He found his way to the observation deck adjacent to the quarantine suites. The doors hissed open to reveal the sisters standing before the massive viewport, their backs to him. They were wearing simple, gray station-issue jumpsuits, their hair clean and damp. They were staring out at the planet below, a beautiful, bruised marble of blue and brown streaked with the angry red scars of the war zones. It was Earth, but from this vantage point it looked almost peaceful. "They gave us these clothes," Elara said softly, without turning. "Are soft." Lyra turned first, her violet eyes scanning him, taking in his clean but casual fatigues, the fading bruises on his face now visible without his helmet. "You're standing," she stated. "Told you I heal fast." He limped over to join them, leaning against the viewport's rail. "The docs say you'll both make a full recovery. Malnutrition, some old fractures, but you'll be fine." Elara finally turned to look at him, her silver hair catching the starlight. "They asked us many questions. About the insurgents, their networks. We told them everything we knew." She hesitated. "They treated us like people." "That's because you are," Kaelen said. Lyra's gaze was intense, searching his face. "And what happens to people like us now? Do we become prisoners again? A different kind of cage?" Kaelen shook his head. "No. Command has granted you both provisional civilian status. You're free, truly free. You can go anywhere in Terran-protected space." The word free hung in the air between them, larger and more terrifying than any weapon. Lyra looked back out at the infinite starfield, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Where would we go? Our people are scattered. Our ship is dust. This metal box is the only home we have now." Elara placed a hand on her sister's arm. "It is a home without chains, Lyra. That is everything." She then looked at Kaelen, her expression softening with a profound gratitude that made him uncomfortable. "You risked everything for us. Why?" He held her gaze, the memory of their shared fight on the bridge vivid in his mind. "Because you stopped being prisoners the moment you chose to fight beside me. You earned your place here." A small chime sounded from the door. A junior officer entered, looking hesitant. "Corporal Vance? Commander Thorne is ready for your debrief." Kaelen nodded. "I have to go." He turned to leave, but Lyra's voice stopped him. "Vance." He looked back. Her expression was unreadable for a moment. Then it resolved into something determined, almost fierce. "When you go back out there, we're coming with you." Kaelen stared at her, then at Elara, who gave a small, firm nod of agreement. "You don't know what you're asking for. It's not just fighting. It's a life of this." He gestured to his own battered state. "We know," Elara said quietly. "We have seen the darkness. We would rather fight it with you than hide from it in the light." The conviction in her voice was absolute. They weren't asking for protection. They were demanding a purpose. They had traded the chains of slavery for the bonds of camaraderie, and they had no intention of letting go. Kaelen looked at them, the calm strategist and the fiery warrior, two sides of the same coin, forged in captivity and tempered in battle. He thought of Thorne's inevitable resistance, the mountains of regulations they'd have to climb, the sheer insanity of it all. He grinned, a real, genuine grin that made the cuts on his face sting. "All right then, but if you're signing up, you do it my way. Training, discipline, the works. You follow orders." Lyra's lips twitched into a smirk. "Your orders?" "Exactly. Then you better make sure they're good ones." She shot back, a flicker of her old defiance returning. But now it was directed outward, at the universe itself. Elara smiled, a true, radiant smile that transformed her face. "We will not let you down." As Kaelen followed the officer out, he glanced back one last time. The two sisters were no longer looking at the stars with fear, but with a sense of ownership. They had a future now, a path. And he, Kaelen Vance, the Deathworlder who had once believed his only function was to break things, was now responsible for helping them build it. The war hadn't changed, but he had. And as he walked toward his debrief, he knew nothing would ever be the same again. The door hissed shut, leaving the sisters in the quiet hum of the observation deck. The boundless potential of the galaxy spread out before them, not as a threat, but as a promise. They had begged for a quick death. Instead, they had been given a reason to live, and they were ready to fight for it. The weeks that followed were a strange, new kind of war, fought not with pulse rifles and plasma grenades, but with bureaucracy, training sims, and the relentless, grinding routine of life aboard the Constellation. For Kaelen Vance, it was a more frustrating battlefield than any ruined city. Commander Thorne had, predictably, fought the idea tooth and nail. They are civilians, Vance, untrained, psychologically compromised, and of questionable allegiance. I will not have you turning my special operations wing into a rehabilitation center. But Kaelen had leverage. The data Elara and Lyra had provided on insurgent network structures and encryption protocols was already yielding intelligence victories. They were assets, and he argued that integrating them was the best way to protect that investment. Thorne had finally, grudgingly, relented, authorizing a provisional auxiliary status pending a brutal probationary period, which is how Kaelen found himself standing in the center of the station's main training deck, watching Lyra fumble with the charging mechanism of a standard-issue plasma rifle. "It's stuck," she grunted, yanking on the power cell. "It's not stuck, you're forcing it," Kaelen said, his arms crossed. "Align the glyphs. Gently." Beside her, Elara handled her own weapon with a more thoughtful, if no less clumsy, reverence. "The weight distribution is inefficient," she noted, her brow furrowed. "It's designed to be durable, not elegant," Kaelen replied. "Now, both of you sight on target 3. Remember, controlled breath." The holographic firing range shimmered to life. Lyra, with a grunt of effort, shoved the cell home and brought the rifle up, firing a wild burst that peppered the ceiling and the wall to the left of the target. Elara took a slower, more measured aim, but her shot went wide right. Lyra scowled at the smoking weapon. "This is a clumsy tool. I preferred the pistol. The pistol was a last resort. This is your primary. You will learn it," Kaelen said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He moved behind Elara, gently adjusting her stance, his hands on her shoulders. "You're anticipating the recoil. Don't fight it. Guide it." She flinched slightly at his touch, a remnant of her old life, but then relaxed, nodding. Lyra watched, her expression unreadable, before turning back to her target with a renewed, furious determination. This was their life now. Drills in the morning, tactical theory in the afternoon, physical conditioning until they collapsed. The sisters, for all their spirit, were starting from less than zero. They had the instincts of survivors, but not the discipline of soldiers. The other personnel on the station gave them a wide berth, their stares a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They were the Deathworlder's pets, a novelty. Kaelen ignored the whispers. He saw what others didn't. He saw the way Lyra's frustration would crystallize into a cold, focused intensity when she finally mastered a new skill. He saw how Elara's analytical mind could deconstruct a complex problem and find a solution everyone else had missed. They were raw, unpolished gems, and he was the relentless pressure turning them into something formidable. One evening, after a particularly grueling session in the microgravity combat simulator, they sat together in the mess hall, a silent island amidst the chatter of off-duty Marines. Lyra was massaging a sore shoulder, her face set in a permanent scowl. "I hate 0G, she muttered. "It's undignified. It's a tactical reality," Kaelen said, sipping his coffee. "You'll get used to it." Elara pushed her rehydrated meal around her tray. "The tactical algorithms they use are surprisingly simplistic. I believe I could optimize the target priority subroutine for close-quarters engagements." Kaelen looked at her, impressed. "Tell." That to the techs. They'd probably kiss you. Lyra rolled her eyes. Let's not give them ideas. A comfortable silence fell between them. It was in these quiet moments that the bond, forged in fire and tempered by routine, felt strongest. They were no longer just a soldier and his charges. They were a unit, a team. Kaelen found himself looking forward to these moments more than he cared to admit. The war, the constant state of alert, it all faded into the background when it was just the three of them. Why do you do this? Elara asked suddenly, her large, moonstone eyes fixed on him. Why fight for a world that so many others have given up on? Kaelen put his cup down, considering his answer. It's my home, he said simply. It's not about the governments or the factions. It's about the idea of it. A world where you don't have to beg for a quick death from the first person who finds you. Lyra stopped massaging her shoulder, her gaze distant. Our home was a ship. It was small, but it was ours. Then the insurgents took it, and they took the idea of home from us. She looked at Kaelen, her violet eyes sharp. You're giving it back. This? She gestured around the mess hall, at the station, at him. This is our home now, and we will fight for it. Her words landed with the weight of an oath. Kaelen felt a strange tightness in his chest. He had spent so long being a weapon, a solitary instrument of death, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be a part of something, to be a foundation. He just nodded, unable to find the right words. The following day, their training took a new turn. Commander Thorne, monitoring their progress, had authorized live-fire exercises in the advanced simulation chamber. The scenario was a hostage rescue in a derelict space station, a classic counterinsurgency op Kaelen led, with Elara as comms and tactical support, and Lyra as point. They moved through the twisting, dark corridors of the sim, their movements synchronized. Kaelen gave hand signals. The sisters responded instantly. When they breached the target room, it was a masterpiece of controlled violence. Kaelen took the high threat, Lyra cleared the corners with brutal efficiency, and Elara guided them, her voice calm in their earpieces, identifying hidden threats and optimal firing lines. When the last holographic hostile flickered and died, the simulation ended. The score flashed on the main display, 98.7%, a new record for a three-person fire team. They stood in the center of the chamber, breathing heavily, their faces slick with sweat. Lyra turned to Kaelen, a wild, triumphant grin splitting her face. See? Deathworlders. Kaelen looked from her grinning face to Elara's serene, satisfied smile. He pulled off his helmet, a slow smile spreading across his own features. Yeah, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. All three of us. In that moment, standing in the glow of their shared victory, the past fell away. The chains, the fear, the solitary existence. It was all gone. They were no longer a Deathworlder and the sisters he saved. They were Fireteam Starfall. And the galaxy had no idea what was coming for it. The station intercom crackled, shattering the moment. Corporal Vance, report to Briefing Room Alpha. Immediate deployment. The grin faded from Kaelen's face. The war was calling. He looked at his team. Elara's expression was resolute. Lyra's was eager, her eyes already alight with the promise of a real fight. Well, Kaelen said, slapping his helmet back on. Let's go see what they've got for us. They walked out of the simulation chamber together, their steps in sync, ready for whatever came next. The training was over. The real work was about to begin. The air in Briefing Room Alpha was cold and still, thick with the scent of ozone and anticipation. Commander Thorne stood before the holo display, his face etched with grim lines that reflected the rotating tactical schematic of a massive, derelict deep space communications array designated Echo Station Theta. Kaelen stood at ease, flanked by Elara and Lyra, who now wore custom-fitted tactical gear, their postures radiating a new, hard-edged confidence. They were no longer refugees. They were operatives. The situation is critical, Thorne began, his voice cutting through the silence. Echo Station Theta went dark 72 hours ago. We believe it's been seized by a remnant faction of the insurgents you encountered in the district, Vance. They're led by a fanatic named Forelag. Their objective is not just to occupy the station, but to use its powerful long-range array to broadcast a scrambled virus that will cripple Terran command and control across the entire eastern seaboard, from New York to Florida. If they succeed, it will create a breach the enemy will exploit for a full-scale invasion. The hologram zoomed in, showing the station's intricate layout. This is a Black Ops insertion. No backup, no official support. Your fire team is the only asset close enough and unorthodox enough to handle this. Get in, neutralize Forelag, and destroy the broadcast core. The fate of the coastal defense grid rests on your success. He finally looked at the three of them, his gaze lingering on the sisters. This is it. Your probation is over. This is your official debut. Do not make me regret this. Kaelen gave a sharp nod. We won't, sir. The journey to the edge of Terran space aboard a stealth corvette was spent in focused silence. They checked and rechecked their gear, reviewed the station schematics, and ran through contingency plans. The sisters were quiet, their usual banter subdued by the weight of the mission. This was no simulation. Failure meant the death of millions. When the Corvette released their modified assault shuttle on a silent, ballistic trajectory, the only sound was the hum of life support and the beat of their own hearts. The derelict station loomed ahead, a silent, skeletal monster against the backdrop of the Milky Way. Their insertion was a masterpiece of precision. Kaelen piloted the shuttle into a mangled docking bay, its magnetic clamps latching onto the station's superstructure with a dull thud that echoed through the dead silence. The bay was a tomb, littered with frozen bodies and the debris of a swift, brutal takeover. Life signs are scattered, but concentrated around the central comm spire, Elara reported, her voice calm in their helmet comms as she monitored the sensor feed from the shuttle. I am detecting a powerful energy buildup in the primary broadcast chamber. They are nearly ready. Then we're out of time, Kaelen said, cycling his rifle. Lyra, you're on point. Elara, watch our six and keep jamming their local comms. Move fast. Hit hard. They moved into the station's arterial corridors, a ghost team in the graveyard. The gravity was failing, creating disorienting pockets of zero-G. Their training took over. They moved with a fluid, lethal grace, using magnetic boots and short, controlled bursts from their suit thrusters. The first patrol of two insurgents never knew what hit them. Lyra took the lead with a vibroblade, a silent, brutal efficiency that was now second nature. Kaelen covered her, his senses stretched to their limit. They were a scalpel, cutting deep into the enemy's heart. But Forelag was no fool. As they neared the central spire, the station's internal defenses activated. Automated turrets dropped from ceilings, and security doors slammed shut, attempting to funnel them into kill zones. They know we're here, Lyra barked, ducking behind a console as plasma fire chewed the wall beside her. Elara, can you override the door controls? Kaelen asked, laying down suppressing fire. Working on it, their system is heavily encrypted. It will take time we do not have, Elara replied, her fingers flying over a datapad linked to her suit. The direct path is blocked. There is a secondary route through the environmental control conduits. It is narrow, but it will bring us out directly above the broadcast chamber. Lead the way, Kaelen ordered. The conduits were a claustrophobic nightmare, a tight maze of humming pipes and flickering conduits. They crawled single file, the sounds of their breathing loud in their helmets. Lyra, smaller and more agile, took the lead, her movements sure and confident. After what felt like an eternity, she held up a clenched fist. Here, the access hatch to the chamber is below us. They peered through a grill into the vast chamber below. It was a cathedral of technology, dominated by the massive, glowing sphere of the broadcast core. A dozen technicians scrambled around it, and in the center stood Forelag, a hulking figure in ornate armor, barking orders. We have one shot at this, Kaelen whispered, his voice tight. Lyra, you and I drop down, create chaos, take out Forelag. Elara, you stay here. The moment you have a clean shot at the core's primary regulator, you take it. That's the priority. Destroy the core. The broadcast stops. Elara nodded, already setting up her rifle, using the grill as a sniper's perch. Her hands were steady. Understood. Kaelen looked at Lyra. Ready. Her violet eyes, visible through her helmet's visor, burned with a cold fire. For this? Always. They blew the hatch. The world exploded into violence. They dropped into the midst of the enemy, firing before their boots hit the deck. Surprise was their greatest weapon. Kaelen moved like a force of nature, a whirlwind of controlled destruction, his every shot a killing blow. Lyra was his shadow, a darting, unpredictable phantom, her blade and sidearm dealing death with ruthless efficiency. The Deathworlder! Forlag roared, turning from the core, a massive plasma cannon rising in his hands. I should have known they would send their favorite monster. You are too late. He fired. The blast was immense, forcing Kaelen to dive behind a console. The return fire from the remaining insurgents intensified, pinning them down. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Elara, any time now, Kaelen shouted over the comms. I cannot get a clear shot. Forlag's men are blocking the firing line, she responded, her voice strained. It was then that Lyra made her move. With a defiant scream that echoed through the chamber, she broke from cover, not toward Forlag, but on a flanking run directly through the enemy's position. It was a suicidal maneuver, drawing every weapon in the room toward her. Lyra, no! Kaelen yelled. But it worked. For a crucial 3 seconds, all attention was on the darting, weaving figure of the younger sister. Plasma bolts scorched the air around her, one grazing her shoulder, spinning her around. But she had created an opening. In that single, frozen moment, Elara had her shot. She exhaled, her finger gently squeezing the trigger. The high-velocity round streaked across the chamber and struck the primary regulator of the broadcast core with surgical precision. A cascade of energy erupted from the sphere. The chamber lights flickered and died, replaced by the red pulse of emergency strobes. The broadcast was dead. Forlag howled in rage, turning his cannon toward the access hatch where Elara was concealed. But Kaelen was already moving. With the core disabled, his only objective was the fanatic leader. He charged, ignoring the fire that glanced off his armor. He slammed into Forlag, and the two titans crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and weapons. It was a brutal, close-quarters. Forlag was powerful, but Kaelen was a Deathworlder, his body a weapon honed on a planet that bred killers. He drove a fist through Forlag's armor, then another, until the insurgent leader lay still. The few remaining technicians surrendered instantly. The fight was over. Kaelen stood, chest heaving, and looked for Lyra. She was leaning against a console, clutching her wounded shoulder, but she was alive, and she was grinning fiercely at him. Elara rappelled down from the conduit, her face pale but her eyes shining with triumph. They had done it. They stood together in the ruined chamber, surrounded by the evidence of their victory. The core was dark. The threat was over. Kaelen looked at the two sisters, the chained prisoners who had once begged him for a quick death. They were now warriors, his partners, his family. They had saved a continent. Fireteam Starfall, he said, his voice filled with a pride he made no effort to conceal. Mission accomplished. Elara placed a hand on his armored arm. We did it together. Lyra, wincing slightly, bumped her fist against his shoulder plate. Just another day for a couple of Deathworlders. As their extraction shuttle docked and they prepared to leave the dead station behind, Kaelen took one last look at the battlefield. He hadn't just completed a mission. He had proven that mercy could be a more powerful weapon than fear, and that the strongest bonds are not forged in ease, but in fire. The war was far from over, but with Elara and Lyra at his side, he faced the future not as a solitary soldier, but as part of something unbreakable. They had been given a chance, and they had remade the galaxy with it. Thanks for listening. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next human legend among the stars.